Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media on this Wednesday evening. It's Talk to Inayat Wadi, and as usual, as we always do on a Wednesday evening, where we unpack a number of issues, and we have a panel to discuss these issues. Now, South Africa, like the rest of the world, we are in for an interesting year. It is election year in South Africa. We know about election year in the United States of America, in the UK, and global issues that are going to be dominating the elections and possibly even impact on the outcome of the elections. Now, South Africa in particular, very, very interesting. And when one looks at South Africa, our standing on the global stage at this point in time, particularly after the ICJ case, South Africa has been in the spotlight. So I'm sure all eyes will be on South Africa and the outcome of the elections. Now, there are a number of issues that we need to unpack, and just looking at the voting landscape in South Africa, and how is this going to evolve over a period of time in the build-up to the elections, and also at the same time looking at a number of issues, looking at election trends, looking at the party dynamics that are playing out. We're talking about voter apathy, youth engagement, economic, social issues, corruption, international relations, the question of Palestine being a focal point. And so all of this will be playing out in the build-up to the elections. And to unpack all of this, my guest tonight on the panel, we've got Professor Daryl Glaser. Areas of interest include research, theory and practice of democracy in South Africa. We've got Lulu White, a thought leader on elections, democracy and governance in South Africa. We've got also Professor Sam Koma, who is a governance expert. I see Professor Daryl Glaser is on already. Lulu White is on as well, and Professor Sam Koma. To all of you, thank you for your time. Good evening to you, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, Prof. Daryl Glaser, I'd like to begin with you, and just for some of the issues that I mentioned in my introduction, some of the comprehensive unpacking of the issues in the build-up to the election year is going to be quite an interesting 2024 for us in South Africa. The fact that we are here under the global radar after the ICJ case as well, but just generally looking at the build-up to the elections, a lot of issues to think about.
Yes, I mean, from a purely domestic point of view, the question is going to be, the central question is going to be whether the ANC retains an absolute majority of seats, of votes and seats, and whether therefore it's going to be able to continue to govern alone, or whether it's going to fall short of an absolute majority and therefore have to enter into some kind of coalition. If it goes into a coalition, will it be to the left or towards the center right, etc.? Will other parties try and gang up on the ANC, resulting in a very fragmented multi-party coalition, potentially reproducing some of this instability we see in local government? So those, from a domestic point of view, those are the central questions. Of course, the world will be interested in the outcome more than usually, in part because, as you say, of the ICJ court case, which has placed South Africa under the spotlight. So I suppose those on the side of the Gazans and Palestinians will be hoping for a result that vindicates either the ANC or any combination of parties that supports the ICJ motion, which would include the EFF and a number of other parties, whereas I assume that parties, say international actors taking a more pro-Israel stance, would like to see perhaps the DA with its more circumspect position, or the ACDP or some other party which presents itself as taking a more balanced position on the issue, whether they might like to see those parties prosper electorally. How much this is actually going to attract international attention in the end is a question that I'm not sure about. South Africans sometimes overestimate how seriously the world takes them. But you're quite right that in light of the ICJ case, more attention is trained on South Africa than usual.
Thank you for that, Prof. And let's go to Professor Sam Koma. Prof, just as a governance expert, and just some of the issues that I'd raised with Professor Daryl Glaser, just how do you see, the elections and just ahead of the elections, some of the issues, and also at the same time looking at it from both a domestic and a global perspective.
Oh yeah, thanks, Inayat, and also. Adding to what Prof. Daryl has already articulated, it's true that our 2024 elections are hotting up. The momentum is already being built. We know that just this month alone, we have two parties new into the political scene, that is Rise Mzansi and also Build One South Africa, that have launched their manifestos. We know that next month, that is Feb, the EFF and also the ANC will be launching their election manifestos in KZN, that is Moses Mabhida. And we know that KZN and also Gauteng provinces are likely to be the battlegrounds for most of the parties, but in the main, it will be a major contest between the ANC, the EFF, the IFP, the DA in these two provinces, because we know that empirically, these are two provinces that have a sizable population size, and thus this is where these parties are intending to draw a bigger chunk of votes as part of, as Daryl articulated, that we are likely to see, of course, a fierce contest for the ANC in terms of retaining its majority come the election day and also the announcement of the results. So also we have seen one splinter party drawn from the ranks of the ANC, that is the new MK party, that is also seeming to be posing an electoral threat to the ANC. And of course, given our past election results and also pattern, we know that most of the breakaway parties from the ANC, they tend to tap into the support base of the ANC, namely the COPE in 2009, the EFF in 2014, and it remains to be seen whether the MK party will also do the same, and what would be the margin if it does pose a threat and also tap into the support base of the ANC. So internationally, yes, the ANC, the country is a focal point of the international community, in part due to the ICJ judgment. But we know that in South Africa, voters and also parties do not really focus on an issue-based voting. So it's not about voters looking at issues of foreign policy and also looking at the dynamics that are taking place internationally as part of influencing their voter behavior or preference or pattern. So largely in our context, voters tend to look at their lived experience, and we seem to have also research studies that are coming out to say since 1994, in our case, we tend to have floating voters. So these are voters that come election day, they tend to vote nationally for a different party, provincially for another different party, and also locally, they also vote for a different party. So the voting pattern is fluid, especially in the urban centers. But in the provinces that have a major size of rural base and also voter population, this is where we tend to see the issue of party loyalty, that come the election day, this is how the voters tend to vote for specific political parties as part of identifying with those political parties. So it will be interesting to see whether we'll see the same pattern coming out with the 2024 national elections. But if you look at empirical evidence since 1994, largely the dominant parties that you'll see also emerging will be the ANC, the DA, the EFF, your IFP, your FF Plus, your ACDP, your UDM, and also the new entrants, Rise Mzansi, your Build One South Africa. I think they are likely to do well come the election day, and to some extent, the new MK party that is a breakaway from the ANC.
Yes, and just to bring Lulu into the discussion now, an interesting term that Professor Sam Koma uses, the floating voter. Okay, and I must admit that it's the first time I've heard of the floating voter, but it's actually very, very interesting in terms of what Prof. Sam Koma is saying. Now, clearly, since democracy, since 1994, we have built some sort of history as far as elections are concerned, as far as election trends are concerned. And just looking at the trends over a period of time and looking at how elections have actually gone, and just your analysis on how you see these trends historically and how they're likely to play out in 2024, Lulu.
Hi. Well, thank you very much for having me, Inayet. Professor Daryl and Sam have actually laid a very firm foundation with regards to their remarks. What we have seen in the past, obviously, with the ANC being the party that many of us regarded as the liberation movement, we've seen their growth. But I think just like every other liberation movement, I mean, if you look throughout the continent, we have seen what is happening to the ANC. We've already started to see the decline of the ANC. So much like all other mass democratic movements that we have seen throughout the continent, where the Liberating Party, the first years of democracy, they enjoy large supportership. But the more elections take place, the more democratic processes take place, the more unhappy, the more frustrated voters become, and then they start losing that support base. I think another factor that actually plays into the fray in this particular instance is the fact that more young people are actually have started having an interest in electoral processes. You see, you read these trends from social media, and you see the frustration that young people are actually expressing throughout the country. And also throughout the continent, because also it's very important that while we look at South Africa as the glimmer of hope and the shining example of sustainable democracies, we must also always take a shot at what's happening around. And every time we do a comparative analysis of what's happening in the continent, the one thing that comes across is the fear that what we see happening in Zimbabwe, what we see happening in the DRC as far as election violence is concerned, you start seeing concerns, particularly from young people who intend to go out and vote, to say they do not want a country where when it is time to change the leadership of that particular party, then there's violence. So I think we are going to see once again a sharp decline in terms of the supporters of the ANC. And that sharp decline is basically going to come, number one, on the basis of a younger voters coming out to vote. And that is also likely going to be influenced by organizations such as Rise Mzansi, which has basically poised itself as a political party that seeks to cater for uppity young people. People that are, the yappy industry of young people. We're also going to experience a decline also with regards to the DA. And I think even in the previous election, we did actually see that with a lot of young Black people within the DA that have actually left the DA. One gets the impression that there's a lot more young people that will not be putting their X's next to the DA this year. It is my view, once again, that the conservative Afrikaner we are going to see a slight increase with regards to the Vryheids Front, because when we did a comparative analysis the last time of the decline of the DA, we noticed that the very same number of people that percentages that the DA had lost had actually been gained by Vryheids Front. So that is something that we can look out for there. The MK is. I heard Sam speak about the fighting for the heart of KZN and for the heart and the heart of Gauteng, and in my view, I think he forgot the MK, and I think the ANC will be fighting for its life as far as KwaZulu-Natal is concerned. I think as much as possible, while the ANC, I think the ANC is starting to see the threat that perhaps the establishment of MK is becoming, particularly in KZN, because obviously that is a stronghold. And when we look at national figures as far as support base, we know that the largest support base of the ANC comes from KwaZulu-Natal. And once that figure actually is fragmented and goes down, it actually trickles down throughout all the other provinces and also nationally. So we are going to see that decline as well as a result of that particular political party. There are other political parties that I think the EFF, on the basis of the fact that it's still very young and it's still very much one of those political parties that are viewed as a political party that has interest in young people, they are likely going to either maintain where they are as a political party or maybe even enjoy a slight increase. But I think we can expect, it may not be completely below the majority. It may not be completely all the way down, but we are going to see a decline in the ANC holding in this particular election.
Yes, thank you for that, Lulu. Professor Daryl, just to move on with you as well. And just looking at the governing party at this point in time, the ANC obviously is going to be central as far as the elections are concerned. And have we actually overcome the liberation movement mentality as far as the ANC is concerned? And the reason why I am asking this question is we know that elections in the past have been quite emotional for many, especially coming through from the ugly apartheid days into a democracy as well. So there has been a number of issues, and as Professor, I think Sam Koma spoke about party loyalty as well. But just in terms of voters, looking at voter engagement, and also at the same time taking a look at a number of issues, social issues, socio-economic issues, and how is this likely to impact on voting trends, on turnout, because we know that there is a lot of disillusionment in this country at this point in time.
Yeah, well, look, I think the ANC probably still holds on to this idea that it's a liberation movement. And in a sense, the ANC still remains a kind of a mothership, because if you think about parties like Congress of the People or parties like the new MK party, look how they're trying to appropriate the symbols of the ANC, or they're trying to claim its kind of revolutionary prestige, its revolutionary charisma. So, they're trying to say we are the true heirs of the ANC liberation movement. And even the EFF, which doesn't use ANC symbols, nevertheless, it's a party that grew out of the ANC Youth League. So, it's quite difficult for a party to come from absolutely nowhere and get a lot of seats. The ANC still seems to be quite central to a lot of what's going on. And by the way, just to reconnect again to that international question, I mean, if you look at, the ANC taking Israel to the ICJ, I think that's also part of an attempt on the part of the ANC itself to reclaim a kind of revolutionary elan, a revolutionary legitimacy, by saying, look, we're still this radical anti-imperialist party like we used to be. We haven't just become a staid, bureaucratic party that's part of the international system. We're still capable of acting like a radical social movement. So you could say that all of the main parties, the ANC itself and the parties that come out of the ANC, are still trying to present themselves as revolutionary liberation movements, or trying to claim that mantle of the ANC. So the ANC remains a central force. And even if the ANC falls below 50%, which is certainly a possibility with so many different parties competing for the ANC in a serious way and with so much popular discontent. But I mean, even if the ANC falls below 50%, it's going to remain by far the largest party, the largest single party. So it's going to be very difficult for other parties to ignore it, even if it falls below 50%. And it's going to be very difficult for other parties to gang up against the ANC to keep the ANC out of power, because any anti-ANC coalition would be very ideologically diverse and very fragmented. So we shouldn't write the ANC off just yet, but certainly it's having to contend with a groundswell of discontent around, for example, failures to deliver energy, electricity reliably to the country, around the persistence of unemployment. I mean, in fairness to Ramaphosa, he faced external shocks in the form of COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ukraine war. All these things have had major impacts. South Africa hasn't fully recovered from their effects. And arguably, in the first place, Ramaphosa never had the kind of regional or organizational base that someone like Zuma had. So his position's always been more precarious. But we shouldn't write the ANC off. It's going to remain, for a couple of election cycles to come at least, the single most important player in South Africa.
Yes. Professor Sam Koma, voter turnout, absolutely important. This is critical, this is crucial. And looking at the potential voters in South Africa, and if I get my maths correct, something like 40 million. But when one looks at the last election, around 16 million had voted, 10 million had voted for the ANC. Now, what I'm saying is looking at low voter turnouts and how is this likely to play out, considering that a large portion of the South African population are youth, young people. And I'm sure that many political parties are targeting these young people. But again, it's about confidence. It's about confidence in voting. It's to understanding why you're voting in the first place, who you're voting, what you're voting for. Are the youth sufficiently equipped to make these decisions? And also, with regard to voter apathy, to overcome voter apathy.
Yes, I think Lulu touched on that, this time around, we are likely to see a bigger number of young people participating in the elections, in part owing to the role that is now played by Rise Mzansi, which its messaging around its election strategy is to tap into the youth vote, because the numbers speak to the fact that a bigger chunk of these registered eligible voters are young people. But during the election day, young people tend to stay away and not participate in the actual voting. And the EFF experienced that dynamic in the previous national election. But also you touch on the issue of voter turnout. So in 2019, the voter turnout was sitting at 66%. My sense is that 2024, the voter turnout is likely to also increase. But if you look at the 6 successive national elections, 1994 to 2019, you realize that the ANC always garners more than 10 million votes out of these registered voters who participate in the elections. So now that you have these new entrants, Build One South Africa, Rise Mzansi, targeting this segment of the registered voting population, then we are likely to see a very interesting outcome, because for the first time, this youth vote is likely to decide on these parties that are supposed to be represented in the National Assembly. So generally, we know that the South African population is politically aware, astute, including the youth. That is why if you look at the universities where most of these young people are residing, they tend to participate in a larger number in the student politics. But when it comes to national elections, they tend not to participate because they may have a sense that there's no party that they can identify with. But this time around, they now have these two parties in the main that they can identify with, and it remains to be seen how that will unfold come the election day.
Yes, and also I think Lulu, I just wanted to touch a bit on voter registration because this is absolutely important, and we've seen many forums. In fact, of late, we've seen so much where voter registration is being encouraged, it's being promoted. I've seen it within our communities as well, where there is this huge drive for people to register, particularly the youth as well. And just to understand again, from a voter registration perspective, once again, the youth considering where, in fact, and I would assume, and I'm sure that is the case, where many young people are not registered to vote, and this is where the target market is.
Yeah. The IEC does generally, when it's election season, they actually do really go out in terms of making sure that that young people go out to vote. There's budgets, in my understanding, there's a huge budget that's normally allocated for young people to go out and vote. In the past, though, we have seen that mainly it was mainly the IEC that would push that type of message around. And I've noticed, however, that in this particular election, we've seen political parties also go out and go out en masse to go and encourage young people to go out and vote. And the reason mainly for that is because many of us have said in the past, and I mean the media as well, have said in the past that young people in South Africa did not participate in elections previously because they felt that all of these political parties were talking at them, and they're not talking to them. And there was an attitude that sought to say, not for us without us, right? And it looks as though in this particular electoral cycle, both political parties and civic society have started to understand that the young people of South Africa are the ones that need to be driving the electoral processes that we are currently seeing. And perhaps that is why there's actually also an expectation that elections there's going to be a higher voter turnout, particularly where youth is concerned. But there's also the factor that technology has played a really big role in as far as making sure that young people are going out registering by their numbers. From the statements that we've heard and we've read also on the website of the IEC, we've actually seen that the majority of people that actually have registered online were young people. And perhaps this is where political parties and civic society at large needs to start engaging the IEC in regards to ensuring that perhaps future elections, the IEC needs to start putting mechanisms in place where online voting is actually a consideration, whether it requires a paper to be put to Parliament so that becomes a reality. But it does appear that while young people are interested in voter registration, and I'm also talking in regards to previous history, we have seen young people would go out and register to vote, but come election day, they're not there to vote. So perhaps this is also another argument that can be made by civic society and political parties to say, in as much as the IEC was able to incorporate the online voter registration process for South Africans, perhaps it's time that they also consider incorporating online voting so that it increases the opportunity for young people to actually participate. Because the reality is that while we call 2024 the 1994 of the millennial, we are not certain whether they're patient enough. They will be as patient as our grandmothers and grandfathers were to vote in 1994.
Yes, in fact, I've seen there's Faisal Daniels who's put a comment up, but we will address that comment later. But just to get back to you, Professor Daryl Glaser, I want to talk about party manifestos. Just how crucial, how important are these party manifestos? And just looking at the major parties in particular, has a lot changed as far as manifestos are concerned? Are we pretty likely to see much of the same?
I don't think, I've addressed this issue in the past, and my general impression is that party manifestos don't matter very much, certainly at the level of detail. So there might be a few headline grabbing features of party manifestos that the public will notice. But the truth be told is that the public doesn't sit down members of the public don't in general sit down and pay, take a party manifesto to bed at night and parse the manifesto in detail. I think it's quite important for parties to lay out a manifesto for those who do want to study its positions in closer detail, and it may reveal some significant innovations or ideological developments within parties. So they're certainly worthwhile for specialists to look at, but I don't think they influence the general public very much. I think what happens is that the public has a general impression of what a party stands for. And in fact, the very existence of a party and a particular kind of leadership and image provides a kind of an informational shortcut for voters. So, for example, when people vote for the ANC, they're primarily thinking about, here's the liberation movement, here's the party of Mandela, or the party of various other subsequent presidents. They'll think about it as an African majority party that will address African majority interests. They may feel a certain loyalty to it. It'll be those kinds of considerations that in general shape how people think about parties. I mean, when it comes to the DA, people will think about it as a party that's perhaps got a more free enterprise orientation, or that will serve minority or protect minority interests against kind of tyranny of the majority or something like that. So I think a lot of voters will have a sort of a general impression of what a party stands for and will largely vote on that basis. So I think when it comes to the new parties, I think a lot of people don't know specifically what the position, say, on climate change is of Rise Mzansi or the MK party or whatever. They have a general impression that maybe these are, Jardine's party or Rise Mzansi, that these are new parties that offer something fresh, that are outsiders, etc. So it'll be general kind of impressions like that shape the way voters react.
Yes, thank you for that, Prof. And just Professor Sam Koma, just as a leading question from the whole question surrounding party manifestos, just looking at voter education, and when we talk about voter education, just to understand what is contained in these manifestos, what do these parties actually stand for? Are we doing enough, or could we do more? I think Professor Sam, perhaps Lulu, you could. Oh, there we go. Okay, go ahead, Lulu.
I think you know what Daryl said about political parties and how people actually vote for the general idea and an understanding of what they think a political party represents. Often they would also look at things such as the party's track record in their locality, wherever they are. If they feel that the party has done fairly well, then people are likely going to vote for that. As far as manifestos are concerned, I think political parties are not playing their role well enough. Are we still here?
Yes, go ahead, Lulu. We can hear you.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think political parties. So I think all of us basically have a role to play in elections, incidentally. And I think it's rather unfortunate because come election season, everybody presents these long, thick manifestos during these rallies where they rally people to actually vote for them. And most of these manifestos, people don't even understand their ideology. When you are talking to voters, you need to be able to address issues or raise issues at a layman's, at a man on the street type of information. So the minute you come to people with these large manifestos, the only thing they take away from it is that you're going to make sure that they have lights, you're going to take away their grant if they don't vote for you. Those are the things that come across. So I think as far as that is concerned, political parties are not playing fair, they're not playing a good role. And as far as that is concerned, civic society and civic organizations also are sort of in a dilemma, because they can't exactly take political party manifestos and actually dissect and share with members of the public to say this is what this means, because then it appears as though they're actually favoring one political party over another. So it's one of those things where political parties at this point, and for me, I also feel that them waiting to launch huge manifestos a few months before an election is actually, unfair, and it's unfortunate, because you're not giving voters enough of an opportunity to be able to interrogate and hold that political party accountable when the time for that accountability comes. Technically, if we were to be saying that our voters and citizens of the country, if we were having a what I would call a healthy life cycle of active citizenry, right now, instead of listening to manifestos and rallies, political parties should be going to their communities and saying, this is the list that you sent me out. You said Tumamina. And these were some of the things that you asked me to do during the time when you guys appointed me. Now that I'm coming close to the end of my term of office, this is what I've achieved. This is what I've achieved. This is what I've achieved. 1, 2, 3, I've not been able to achieve because I need ABC done. And therefore, please vote for me so that this time I'm able to do that. But instead, we hear each and every election cycle the regurgitation of the same ideologies, the same ideas, and everything is basically the same. Vote for me because I will do 1, 2, 3. 5 years down the line, none of those things are done. Only one of those things are done. And then you hear all of these other charges that are happening in the world. And as a voter, you're left very disenfranchised and very unhappy because there's no sense of accountability.
Yes. Also, Prof. Sam Koma, I know you had a bit of an audio problem, but I'm glad you are back with us. I want to talk about political personalities and in terms of their role and how, I'm talking of the big names in politics. We're talking about Cyril Ramaphosa, we know Jacob Zuma, behind the scenes with MK, Julius Malema, John Steenhuisen, and just looking at these political personalities, how big a role or to what extent would they influence voters generally?
Oh, yeah. So the issue of parties that are dominated by single personalities, if you look at the trend since 1994, they tended to do better at the polls. But that has evolved. It has changed. You realize that parties like the National Freedom Party, the IFP, are struggling because they were formed by strong personalities. For example, the former founder of the National Party, who's now no more. But now you can see the party is having ructions. They can't really hold up in terms of uniting the party and also galvanizing their voter support base come the national elections of 2024. But also previously, we've seen it's a party that is struggling. You take a classic example of UDM when it was launched or formed in 1996, 7, somewhere there. UDM was doing well in terms of the voter support it garnered in each of the successive elections. So that has waned a bit nationally if you look at how these political parties have performed. So the advantage of the ANC is that it does not have this single dominant personality that it relies on to entice and also attract a voter base. It has its own strongholds. And each time it goes into the elections, it says, let's target our strongholds. We know the voting districts that tend to deliver a sizable percentage of voter support for the party. So it has the benefit of that, as opposed to these other parties that, are small in size, but they rely on the dominant figure or personality. A classic case also is this new Umkhonto we Sizwe party. You can see that because of Zuma, the party is now able to attract some kind of support. Of course, we are yet to measure that support come the outcome of the elections. But just because it's Zuma, a dominant figure who was part of the national politics since 1994, having served as a state president and a party president, that party is going to tap into the support base of the ANC because of his popularity to some extent. But also, it's not given that because he's a popular figure, especially in KZN and also to some extent nationally, that party will succeed in terms of winning a bigger percentage come the election day.
Thank you for that, Prof. Sam and Professor Daryl. Just to move on, and just in your analysis and also trying to unpack the major issues that are likely to dominate the elections and the build-up to the elections, what would some of them be?
I don't think there are going to be any strikingly new issues. I mean, we're quite familiar with what the dominant issues are. The issues, people keep citing them: poverty, inequality, unemployment. In addition, we've got issues around electricity supply that have been very prominent. There's a general sense that South Africa is kind of economically stagnating, that the management of state-owned enterprises and of the state generally is deteriorating, that we're in some sort of slow decline and possibly sometimes not so slow. So, and of course, overshadowing all this are issues around corruption and the ability to hold corrupt leaders accountable. I think all of these questions are going to be present, and they're all familiar questions. The problem for the ANC is precisely that they are familiar questions, and the ANC has been in power since 1994, and it has to explain why it has not more successfully addressed these questions. Of course, the ANC is able to point to achievements over the years in terms of supply of, for example, homes and basic, social grants, and so supplying electricity to rural areas or piped water to rural areas. It's been able to point to achievements. It's provided a little bit of for all of its constituencies: the labor movement, the poor, the rising black middle class, and so on. So it's been able to point to some achievements and has been able to establish a certain amount of gratitude in certain areas for those achievements. I've encountered people in, for example, rural, the former Transkei, who are deeply grateful that they've got electricity in their homes. So, it's able to point to some successes, but then it's also got to explain these enormous failures that in many ways overwhelm the successes. One of the ways the ANC has been able to regenerate itself over the decades is by establishing new leaders. The ANC isn't one of these African parties that's had one leader since independence. It's often able to give itself a fresh face by establishing a new leader. The trouble is that, of course, Ramaphosa's already had now a full term. A lot of people look to him to solve some of these problems, and he's only begun to, at best, scratch the surface of resolving them. And Zuma, is, of course, in his MK, with his MK party, trying to present himself as a new face, but he's in fact an old face, and he presided over a lot of the institutional collapse that Ramaphosa inherited. But the issues that are going to dominate this election are the same issues that have dominated a succession of elections around poverty, inequality, unemployment, failures of state policy, deteriorating service delivery, deteriorating state performance.
Yes, and also Lulu, just a question for you. Looking at voters in terms of embracing certain principles and talking about have we embraced the principle of Ubuntu? Have we embraced the concept of a rainbow nation when elections come up and when we vote? How important are these things? Do they really matter with voters? Are we still pretty much the same? Certain people will vote along certain lines, party lines, who they affiliate with. Have we come to terms with these issues in this country?
The country has really not come. Look, with the exception of rugby, of course, the Springbok is the only, in my view, the only rallying point that we really do enjoy generally as a country, right? Because during World Rugby, we also, all South Africans throughout the country and even outside the country, singing with one voice, embracing the spirit of Ubuntu. But once the festivities passed, we went back into our realities. And you can also see it again, once again, through sport, with soccer, where you see this fragmented support for Bafana Bafana. And you hear things like, we are no longer greater together because it's no longer Springbok. And that is basically the attitude that exists in the country. People are still going to vote according to their loyalties, which parties they align with in terms of their loyalty. They're still going to vote along that. People are going to vote for mainly that. It's generally going to be around that. And that is why perhaps Daryl, when he spoke earlier on, he said that people are still, we are still going to see that the ANC has a large support margin. It's precisely because of that, because people would still want to give the ANC the benefit of a doubt that they will likely do better once again when they come into office. And yes, you've got political parties such as the EFF and the MK recently that are saying we are better than the ANC. We've learned from what the ANC, where the ANC has failed. We are going to be better because we are offering you this. In KZN, you don't have water. In KZN, you don't have this. We are saying we're the better alternative on the basis of that. So then you see that even those two political parties, particularly, they are rallying around more or less what the ANC more or less represents. So you are going to see the very same type of party loyalties that are going to be the ones that come through once again for this election.
Thank you. I see, Prof. Daryl, I know you've got to leave by 8 o'clock, so I'm going to go around and just very quickly, we've got about 3 minutes, 60 seconds, final thoughts from you, Prof.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add something to the previous comment. I'm a university lecturer, and I've experienced firsthand some of the disillusionment that you have amongst a lot of young people, partly about general state performance, but also partly a disillusionment with the whole constitutional settlement in South Africa and with the idea of non-racialism and the idea of the rainbow nation. So this came out very clearly in the fallist protests a few years ago at the university. And in that light, actually, the rallying around the Springboks is something I found quite interesting, because I suppose it's very fashionable and not irrational to dismiss the idea of the rainbow nation and the idea of a shared identity. But it did strike me after the Springbok victory that there were a lot of people who were keen, sort of a kind of a silent section of the population that were actually keen to maintain some sort of possibility of national unity and national identity and some sort of shared collective project, shared hope. That was to me one of the things really underlined by the rallying around the Springboks. We'll see what happens now, what the effects would be if Bafana managed to go much further with AFCON. Anyway, election results are going to be very interesting because of all these new players. So let's wait and see what happens.
Thank you for that, Prof. Sam. Your final minute.
Just also adding to what my colleagues have just alluded to. So if you look at the 2019 national elections results, we have two parties that registered electoral growth. One is a party to the left, which is the EFF, another party to the right, which is the FF+. And that tells you the racial divide in how the votes were cast by the registered and eligible voters. So this time around, we're likely to see the same pattern coming out again, but I think the Rise Mzansi is a game changer because of the demographic profile of its support base in terms of age and also race.
Thank you for that. And Lulu, in my house, the lady has the final word.
Look, we are looking forward to what this year is going to deliver for us. I think personally, I would like an increased voter turnout. I would like to see more young people coming out. I am also quite disappointed, though, that we've spoken about Rise and Zans, we've talked about Bosa, we've spoken about MK, and we've said nothing about Sarah. And obviously, this is something that comes across very strongly for me as a woman, because I feel that democracy in South Africa, particularly when it comes to election, women still seem to be behind. They seem to still they still play much more of a supportive role, as opposed to them being in the forefront of these type of electioneering processes. And I think it's really quite sad, because we're in a country where you've got about 52% of the population being women. Yet when it comes to elections, you still see very much men leading the polls, and it's quite disappointing. But other than that, we're looking forward to what the year is going to look at. I think we should be. I think realistically, we should have an expectation that it is likely that we are going to see a lot more coalitions in a similar fashion that we've seen with municipal elections as well. It would be interesting to be part of the people that get into National Assembly the day after the election, or when the swearing in happens and they have to elect a president. It would really be interesting to see how the dynamics play out there, because we also have independent candidates that are participating. Will there be a house that is full that says, let us for once take an independent candidate to become the president, or will we have a party? If there's coalitions, obviously, dynamics change. I don't think we ever imagined a situation where the ANC would not be leading any of the big metros that currently they're not leading. So 2024 is wide open. Anything can happen.
Well, let's see what happens then. Coalition governments, that's a topic for another day. It's a huge topic on its own. But Professor Daryl Glaser, Professor Sam Koma, and also Lulu White, we thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out this evening in the company of Salam Media. All the best to all of you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, it brings us to the end of talk with Inayat Wadi. We still got a lot more to come, and we are going to be focusing on the ICJ case and diplomatically, what does this mean for South Africa? We've got another power-packed panel lineup coming up.